Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I want to show you kind of ring that I've been making for a really long time. It's a pretty simple one to make, but the different variations you can do with it are really amazing. There's a lot of different choices. So it's been a versatile ring for me in various configurations, and I wanted to show it to you today. So before we get started though, thank you for visiting my channel. I appreciate you coming, and if you wouldn't mind, hit the like button before you leave. And check out some of my other videos, and then maybe subscribe if you like the content that's here. I'm putting out about 3 movies a week, and I think it's pretty valuable information. So if you're, especially if you're a beginner and you need basic information, this is a good place to start. Or if you're more advanced and you just want some ideas for projects, I'm putting out a lot of project videos. So let's get started. So for this one, I picked out a little round peridot. I think it's a pretty one. I hope you can see that there. And we'll use that for the stone. The only materials you need, I'm going to need some 14 gauge square wire and some 18 gauge round wire to make the prong setting, and use hard silver solder. So you can use whatever kind of solder you use, and that's okay. Generally with these, I make them bigger than I need to be and cut them down. So and that's mostly because I'm usually teaching a group of people how to do this, and they're all going to have different sizes, so I tell them to cut it a little bit bigger. But I usually tell them about 3.5 inches or so. And we're going to cut 2 of these, which I'll be using for the band. And I'm just going to cut them and set them to the side for now, and then we'll do the prong setting first, I think. So for the prong setting, I'm just going to cut myself a piece of 18 gauge round wire, 6 inches long-ish. Okay, and we're making a prong basket setting from scratch. I'm going to do a 4-prong one, and we need to make 2 rings, one that's just about the same size as the stone, so that if I set the stone on it you wouldn't be able to see the outside of the ring, and then one that almost fits inside of that one is usually what I tell people. So let's file this flat here. And you can make this ring in whatever manner you make rings, but I just generally hand make them like this. That way it allows me to adjust the size pretty easily. That's pretty close. Alright, let's see how. Alright, so when I'm looking at it, that angle, I can still see the ring, so I'm going to make it a tiny bit smaller than that. I can still see it a little bit, so I'm going to take just another little tiny piece out of there. That looks pretty good. I'll make a second ring. I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller. There. So see, it almost does, but doesn't quite fit in there. That's usually about how big I make them. So, all right. Next step, let's solder these closed with a little tiny piece of solder. If you're new to silversmithing, this may be a little bit of an advanced project for you. Best thing I can suggest is you learn how to pick solder if you want to do prong settings like this, because pick soldering makes things so much easier. So I will put a link up there to a video where I talk about pick soldering and how to do it. now, where the solder joint is, I'm going to make a little mark there, and then I want to make a mark straight across from it, which is the hardest part for me. I really get it right straight across. We're putting it on the solder joint so that when we do the vertical prongs, we get a free solder job. We don't have to add solder to it. So I'm going to let that dry for a second. And what I'll do is then I'm going to cut a notch on either side on the outside of the rings. But if I don't let them dry for a second, then I rub it off with my fingers while I'm holding them. So I may still do that, but we'll see. Alright, so right where the solder joint is here. We'll see how close I got to straight across from each other. Sometimes I do it better than others. My fingers are big, so it's a little hard to do some of these little tiny things. Plus I'm getting old and getting blind, so I'm going to squeeze these to make sure I don't have a wobble in any direction or anything. Nobody wants a wobble in their prong setting. Okay, the rest of this 18 gauge, I'm going to cut myself a piece about, what, 2 inches long, maybe 1 3/4. I'm going to make a V out of it like this. Then, for me, because my fingers are a little big, if I take my tweezers and set the ring so that the notch is here and here, I can kind of slide it down in that notch and see where it sits. It sits nicely about right there. So that's where I'll make a mark. And on these, I'm going to attempt final notch on the inside of this little thingamajig. I usually file those not more than halfway through. If you get them too thin, they can break off when you're doing stuff here. So let's slide that down and see if it snaps into place now. Okay, we'll just slide it down here and see if it notches in nicely. That's pretty good. Okay. So I find it easiest to put them in a third hand like this and then tilt it just slightly. If you tilt it too much, you'll oftentimes have things drop off. So just a little tiny bit of a tilt so you can access it more easily. And like I said, we got one free solder joint here because there's solder in place already from when we soldered that little ring together. So I'm going to pick up the second one, but I'm going to heat the entire thing, pushing upwards from the bottom with the heat while I have it horizontal like this, but I'm watching for that one to solder on its own. I'm not 100% sure which side it is. Okay, it was this side over here that flowed on its own. Now I just need to pick solder this one here. Just like that. Now let's slide this one down. This is going to be the ring that the stone actually sits on top of. Get it in those little notches I found. Yeah, I didn't file it very centered. So I'm pushing it down about there, and that's about where I'm going to make the notches, I think, for this one. You want to try and get these two nice and parallel and not too far apart, but if you get them too close together when you're soldering, you may have one slump and they'll stick together. And that would be unfortunate. Okay, so again, I get one freebie on this one. I'm not sure which side it is, so we'll find out. Key to doing these is not heating from above, but pushing the heat upwards from the bottom. If you melt one or two of these the first time you try them, don't be surprised. They're a little challenging. Okay, so I got those on. Now I need to make a mark down the center of these on the outside of the rings here, at least as close as I can get to the center. Now I'll just make a notch in the center here on the top ring, on the outside. And I can use that as a guide for making a notch in the bottom ring, kind of. Okay, got notches there. I'm going to take that leftover piece of 18 gauge, where did I put him? And I'm going to cut myself just a little. He's about 2.5 inches long, maybe. A little bit longer than the previous one, just so we can get around the other one. And we'll make a V out of this one too. I usually find that the second V that I make, it helps if you leave it kind of curved outwards like that, because sometimes it's difficult to get contact with the bottom ring when you're soldering it in, because we're going to be doing this here, sliding it down here and making a notch just for the top rings on this one. So I hope you can see that there. If you try to get 4 notches all lined up just right, it's really hard to do that. So as long as you get the top 2 notches in across from each other, you can get this all to solder together. So I'm going to use my fingers as kind of a guide there. Okay, so I'll slide this on here. Got too much of a little curve outwards here. Okay, and I generally bend these inwards just slightly at the top here like this to get a good, to springing together. Kind of holds it in place. And we'll position it like this again. And I get no free solder joints on this one, so I have to get all 4 of them. But then we'll be pretty much done with the prong setting. If I'm going to screw it up, this is usually where I screw it up. This is one of those where you got to be pretty quick with getting the heat away, so you don't cause anything else to fall apart. Okay, let me check all these. I think we got 8 solder joints. Okay, now I'm just going to trim off the bottom here, underneath this ring. Like that, and then I'm going to trim these off a little short. I certainly don't need them that long. Okay, and then I usually file this flat with a bastard file. That's good to go. That'll be fine. Now these two, for the band, these square 14 gauge wires. Let's get those straight to start with. For me, straightening wire is easiest if I use the flat nose pliers to hold the wire, but not to bend it. Use my fingers to bend it and just use the pliers for leverage. It dings the metal up less, and I seem to get faster results at getting things straight. Good enough. Okay. If you need to, find the center of these, but I usually just kind of eyeball it. But what we're going to do is we're going to turn these both into hairpin shapes. Kind of like that. Okay. And then the more symmetrical you get them, the nicer your finished ring will be. So trying to get them as similar as possible as far as the width of the curve up here at the top and everything like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually forge these flat, about that much of it, so it's flattest on the end down here, and gradually, if you look at it from the side, it gradually gets thicker and thicker until it tapers back into the square. So I'm going to pound those a little bit flat. I normally do this behind me, but I thought I'd just show you right here where we're doing the rest of this stuff. You can see that? Okay. Alright, so I usually hold these with my fingers over here, because if you start pounding on this part, these are going to start spreading open. So hold them this way to keep that from happening. But so if you look at the side there, it's narrowest at the end and gradually tapers back into a square. So do that on both of them. You can do these with 14 gauge round too, but I don't think the result looks as nice. So, okay, so those are pretty symmetrical. Now, one of the things that we did when we were pounding on those is we made the end of these really work hardened and brittle. So we want to soften these back up again, and to do that we're going to anneal them. Annealing is where you bring the metal up to almost to like a reddish hue, and then just let it cool down. And what that does is it takes some of that work hardening out and makes it soft again. Anytime you work the silver, like pounding on it, twisting it, bending it, it gets harder and harder. And this reverses that process. If I hadn't done that, when I go to make the next bend, you can crack it up here because it's gotten so brittle. So what I need to do now to make these shaped the way I want them to be to make the band is I'm going to bend them one of these away from me and one towards me so that it creates a bend right at the top of this. If you grab it down here low like that, it may try to bend further down. I want to try and keep that bend contained at the top up there as close as possible. So I'm going to start by grabbing it up here with the flat nose pliers, and I'm going to push that hand away like this while I'm pulling with that finger, and then see how it's kind of got the bend started way up at the top here. Now I can just use my fingers and kind of spread that open like that. And what we're shooting for is getting it to lay flat on the table like that. Now we're going to do both of those, and it's important that you, if you bent the one on your right hand away from you for the first one, on the second one do the same thing. If you do it the opposite way, they will not fit together. So start this one the same way. I just use my fingers and my thumbs to kind of like bend it like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a ring that's soldered together like that. But my next step is getting these guys to lay next to each other perfectly flat so I can solder them together. And that's what I'm going to play with these a bit to get them to do that. This prong setting, when I do get these lined up, is going to go right in the middle there. So I'm probably going to just kind of eyeball it like this. That's going to give me plenty of room like that. I could do a little wider, probably not much narrower though. That looks probably good enough. Oh, something I do sometimes if I want to make sure to line it up exactly the same as I had it is just make a mark across there. You line those back up when you go to flux it and everything. Okay. I'm going to use a generous amount of solder on this one because I want these seams to be complete and invisible when I'm done. It's important when you're heating this one that you heat it down up and down the full length here. One of the things people struggle with when they're soldering is forgetting to heat the entire piece. So what I usually do is I get it almost to the flow point where the solder is starting to curl a little bit. And then I'll focus completely on one side to get it to flow over there. And then I'll focus on the other side after I heat the whole thing up again a little bit more. So I'm watching the solder when it starts to get a little hot and curly, like it's starting to over here. Now I focus on this side, let it flow completely. See how I kind of sucked it together? Okay. Now I'm going to heat the whole thing a little bit. So while I was doing that, this side was cooling a bit. And now I'll focus on this side here. You want that seam to run as far up as it'll go. Okay, so we got a good seam all the way up and down that. Looks pretty good. Now, on this one, I usually take it near the end of the ring handle here. I'm going to wrap it around, and I cross them over like this at a smaller size than I'm eventually going to make this. Okay. Just like that. Okay. And then, to get the size you want, just slide it down. Say I want a 6 here. Okay. And I'll make a mark right across the 6. Just like that. Then I'll cut it on both of those ends. Even though it springs back, I still want to cut it on the lines because that's where it's the right size. So I'm going to cut this. I actually find it easier to straighten these back out a little bit so I can file the ends nice and flat. Okay, now when I solder them, I'll put them straight towards each other. They get a little harder to bend once you have 2 square wires soldered together like this. But as always, you got to push them past a little bit so they're pushing together. That a little bit. I'm just fiddling with them to get them lined up a little bit. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm probably going to curve a little strip of solder so I can drape it over that. That's what I do a lot of times in this case. You could just probably pick solder it if you wanted to, or just lean a piece. But if you take a longer strip like this, you bend it around the pliers. If you want. Not required. Okay, could have got a good solder joint there. A little cleaning up, file. Now I'm going to go ahead and round this back out on the man. Like I normally would, except on my knee usually. I'll round it out a little better when I'm getting close to done, but basically I got a little band that splits, has a little swirl on either side, and then we'll mount that prong setting right in there. But let me clean this up a tiny bit. Personally, on the band here, I like to file it smooth so it ends up looking like a single piece of wire that splits, a single piece of metal that kind of splits. So I file it like that as close as I can up to the end there. Okay. So, now we got to figure out how to get this in here. And sometimes you might need to do a little bit of adjusting as far as the width of the gap here. And you can do that by actually squeezing it this way a little bit if you need to. Or you can spread it open with your other pliers if you need to. Stick it in this way and twist it because it's wider in one dimension than the other, and that'll spread it open a little bit. You could situate it either way. You could situate it like that if you wanted to, or you could situate it kind of at a diagonal, if you prefer. I'm going to situate it this way this time and get it to sit in there nicely, like that. Okay. This is one of those times where I use the third hand, but I pinch it open a little bit like that. Okay, again, I'm going to use really tiny pieces. Well, actually, I don't need to use tiny ones, but you don't want to have huge blobs of solder over here, so not huge ones, maybe. It's hard to clean that out with the Dremel without cutting into that little swoop on either side. And the trick to soldering these in without having your bezel fall, or your prong setting fall apart, is most of the mass is in the band on this thing, so that's mostly where you're going to be heating. The setting itself will get hot just by being in proximity to that. So, let's peek at the sky, make sure you stay relatively straight. Looks alright. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and pickle that, and then I'll come back and show you how to finish that after a bit. So I did the pre-polishing on the ring here a little bit. I still need to use some white diamond on the inside. I forgot to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and set this stone, and then I'll finish up and show you the final product here. Okay. Just trying to get an idea where the girdle of the stone is going to hit on these prongs. Where they do is where I'm going to file a little bit of a narrow spot. Kind of right down. That girdle is going to hit on the inside of the prongs. Just kind of narrowing it out a little bit. I want it to kind of bend in that spot when I put the stone in here. Don't go crazy on how much you file this, just a little bit of an indent. Okay, then I usually start taking one of these inwards a little bit. Taking one straight across inwards. Make sure it's sitting flat. And then we'll go the opposite sides here. That one in. That one in. Now, these are going to bump into each other, so I'm going to cut them a little bit shorter. This is not going to be where I leave them. This is just so I can get them to lay down pretty good. They're stable enough now where I can start laying down the prongs on top of the stone there. Oopsie. A little overzealous on that one right off the bat. I do them kind of evenly so you don't push one side of the stone down and keep the other side up. Actually caused it to tilt that way a little bit. Now, we'll do it a little more symmetrically, back and forth. Okay, now, when I go to cut these, I'm going to cut them just about halfway up the facets that are between the girdle of the stone and the crown facet, or excuse me, the table facet. That. And then spend a little time with the file, very carefully rounding these over. Some people use a little cup burr that you can get for your rotary tool. Kind of like doing it this way. I generally run my finger along the top and see how smooth it feels. Try not to leave anything that's too catchy that'll catch on clothing. So I think I'm going to go polish that, and then I'll show you the final product. Okay, there's my ring. I think it came out pretty good. I'll take a nice picture and put it at the end of the video. Well, thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed that particular type of ring. I think it comes out pretty most of the time, and it's a good seller. So if you wouldn't mind, make sure to hit the like button before you leave, and share this link with other people you know who might like this as well. My channel's growing. I'm up to 900 subscribers now, which blows me away. I appreciate the great comments and the nice things that people say, and I love the comments and suggestions. So I'm always open to video ideas and constructive criticism as well. So thank you for watching. Take care. Happy silversmithing.